Center pivots are often called circles as a slang term, and we will note that there are in the neighborhood of 4,000 center pivots in the state of Washington, somewhere in that neighborhood. Also in the state of Oregon and Idaho, but you add up all the pivots in the Pacific Northwest, we're at somewhere 10 to 12,000 units. The average center pivot, when you talk to a sales rep, is going to say, well, the average pivot fits in a quarter section of ground. It will cover about 125 acres. Now, if you were to go through and average out the acreage under all the pivots in the Northwest, it will be less than that, because some of these pivots are only part circles and some of them are short. They don't always go into places that have great big fields available. You might have a 2 or a 3 or a 4 tower pivot in a place where it might be 20 to 40 acres is all. But we might have some that are extended length that can even go a much greater area. And simply calculate the area by knowing that the area under the units is pi r squared, and you can find out how many total square feet you got, divided by 43,560, and you got how many acres you have under that machine. What we're going to do is talk about the components, and then we'll go out in the field and look at it. So we'll get the terminology, and then we'll go out and look at it. We start at the pivot point. This thing has to anchor somewhere, because it's a big long arm with a whole bunch of towers on it that just goes around in a circle. The water is delivered to a central point, and it just keeps going around and around and around and around and around. So we have at the center of this what we call the pivot point. And it's got to be a solid enough structure to be able to anchor itself and support the pipe that are going to go out the machine. And so as an anchor, the first thing we have to do is go out and pour a slab of cement under that thing. And that slab of cement usually is in the neighborhood of 6 yards of concrete. Now that acts as an anchor so that this thing just doesn't get pulled sideways as the pivot is running around the field. Now, how much does concrete weigh a yard? About 2 tons. About 4,000 pounds, about 2 tons, so we got 12 tons of anchor sitting there. And then we set the pivot point right on that pad. And the pivot point then is made out of steel. Steel legs, generally 4-sided. There are a few 3-sided ones out there in the industry, but most all of them are 4-sided, with crossbars to give it support and also to be able to climb up it, because we may have to do some service up here on the top of it. The pipe comes right up the center. Comes from an underground main line. We will bring in an underground main line. Generally speaking, we are going to run somewhere in the 1,000-gallon range, plus or minus a little bit. Say an extended pivot, you might be up to 12, 13, 1,400 gallons a minute. Little baby pivots could be down in the 300 or 400-gallon range. But again, we're not talking about, in the total scheme of things, really super huge flows. Even though 1,000 gallons a minute sounds like a lot, you get out on some of these big projects and they have 235 center pivots on one farm. You multiply 1,000 times 235, now you're talking some big flow. But the pipe coming in is going to be generally somewhere around 8 or 10 inch pipe, feeding this. And in that size pipe, as we talked about with the PVC versus steel, generally speaking, PVC will be chosen because of the price. The value of the pipe is going to cost less to put in a PVC main line to deliver water to this point than it will be a steel main line. Also, it should last a little longer, quite a bit longer. And in general, it's easier to install. Also, the pressure ranges that we're operating at on most center pivots are never greater than 100 psi. And that's generally when we have lots of elevation we have to overcome. We can put these on really steep terrain, so if we have a pivot point and we're driving it up a hill, we can have a lot of energy consumed just by elevation, by pushing water up a hill. Because most of the sprinkler packages aren't going to run at that high of pressures. But we do have to overcome all of the resistance in the system plus the elevation that we might have to overcome as well.